Hello, Brian Pierce with the Pierce Brothers, and today we're going to talk about the Freedom Arms Model 83 revolver, which I'm going to call, or challenge if you will, someone to find a better made, higher quality revolver anywhere in the world today. These guns are remarkable with what they are. But let's go back and talk a little bit about the history of the gun and perhaps what's the most famous cartridge associated with this gun, the 454 Casull, and how they were developed. So back in the early 50s, a young inventor by the name of Dick Casull found himself working for P.O. Ackley, famous gunsmith down in Utah. And P.O. Ackley and Dick Casull did a bunch of destruction testing of guns. Rifles, handguns, other things. They want to know the breaking points with them, what pressures they would or would not take. It was some very interesting testing there. P.O. Ackley was set up to make his own barrels, did a lot of his own conversions on guns and so forth. So Dick loved this gun. That was his passion. He actually started off with the Colt Single Action Army in 45 Colt, and he soon learned that was that he wanted more power than what that gun was capable of. And this led him to build, and I did a video on this here a while back, so you might look it up, but this is a Colt Single Action, and it was made about 1903, if I remember correctly, and this is one that Dick built, and it was a rusty wreck when he bought it for literally a few dollars from a gun shop, and he took and he built, and this is a very important story because he fitted it with a cylinder that had made a cylinder basically, and he was the first to develop or do this. He line bored the gun, and what that means, before you install a barrel, you take a sub caliber or a cylinder that has no chamber, and you fit it up, lock it tight to the gun, you block it, you brace it, you put a gauge or a special fixture in the front of the frame, in the receiver ring, if you will, or receiver threads, and then you bore holes from the front of each chamber. And what that does, it means that every chamber is dead nuts aligned with the axis of the bore. And then you take the cylinder out, you do your final chambering from the breech end of the cylinder, you fit the barrel, and in this way you actually have a dead perfectly centered chamber, each chamber with the barrel. Most factories, they'll take a bunch of mass-produced cylinders and a bunch of frames and barrels, and they put it all together, and they make sure that they range, but they can be a little bit off, and that's where the 11-degree forcing cone came from. So this was actually the very first gun that was ever line bored. And what's interesting is Dick did this gun prior to the development of the 44 Magnum. He made this one in 44 Magnum before the 44 Magnum. He took 30-40 Craig cases and he cut them off, and he ran at high pressures, and he's able to run a 250 grain bullet about 1,600 feet a second out of this gun. Yeah, really. He double heat treated the frame, double heat treated the cylinder, brought the Rockwell strength way up on it. And again, this was 1954 when he did this. So now let's fast forward a little bit. He ultimately took a Colt Single Action, and he wanted more power. He wanted the 45 Colt. This was a 6-shot gun, by the way, but he wanted more power. So he ultimately, over the next couple years, he took a Colt Single Action, did the same stuff he learned on this gun, double heat treating the frame, the cylinder, and so forth, but he made a special 5-shot cylinder. And that was hugely significant because it added substantial strength, amount of metal, in other words, amount of steel around each chamber. He began using what was known as triplex loads. He put bullseye in the case, followed with a charge unique, followed with 2400. And that was, I do not recommend doing that. It was very hot load, pressures could be erratic, but he managed to get some amazing velocities, and Dick called that gun the 454 Casull. Ultimately, he began making custom guns on Ruger Super Blackhawks that started in the early 60s, and he'd make 5-shot guns. He eventually got Winchester making some lengthened 45 Colt cases, and this led to the final development of what's known as the 454 Casull. Now, his first gun that was technically the lengthened 454 Casull as we know it today. I remember reading this article by Claire Rees, and he basically, unfortunately I don't own this gun, but this was a one-of-a-kind tool room gun. And what Dick did is he literally took a block of 4140 steel. He went down to the local machine shop. This gun's an ammo, by the way, is October 1972. So he literally took a block of steel and he sculptured this gun. He cut out the frame, did everything, machine work, fitted the gun with a 5-shot cylinder, and get this, Dick loved fixed sights because the Cole single action, he liked how they were when he rode his horse. He didn't like them gouging the inside of his arm. You know, there was just things. So he loved fixed sights, but he made it a fixed sight gun. He was able to get a 235 grain bullet to go over 2,000 feet per second, 2,035 feet per second, as I remember. Now, Dick also made the comment, I knew Dick very well. He made the comment, he said during the 50s and 60s, he said it was pretty standard for anybody that was doing a Wildcat cartridge or a new development to put, whatever velocity it was, they'd automatically add 100 feet per second velocity to their clip. Just automatically they'd add it. And he said everybody did it. He said I did not. So kind of interesting. But in 1973, you'll find this interesting. He flew to Salmon, Idaho with an investor, and they were trying to get interest in the gun industry to start a new company. And there was some false starts with a couple of 2 or 3 different companies actually. But anyway, they flew to Salmon, Idaho. They met with Elmer Keith. They went out with Elmer Keith in his 4-inch model. Well, it wasn't even a Model 29, it was a pre-Model 29 44 mag. And they shot steel. They did a bunch of shooting and so forth. Elmer found the gun interesting, but he never wrote about it. And so I think honestly at that time Elmer would have been 74 years old. He's probably like, I'm gonna leave that for the young guys to shoot that gun. And honestly, Keith would have been happy with his original heavy loaded 44 specials. He didn't even want the 44 Magnum originally. He'd have been absolutely 100% happy, but he was ecstatic with the 44 Magnum, and he kind of went on with the 44 Mag, never looked back. But the 454, of course, somewhat dwarfed the 44 Magnum. And so there you have it. So now we're going to skip a lot of information in here. We're going to jump right to 1979 when Dick Casull and Wayne Baker formed a relationship or a partnership. Without the 454, Freedom Arms would have never existed. And without Wayne Baker, the Model 83, as it would become known, would never have existed. So ultimately it takes a tremendous amount of time to start up a new gun company. A lot of investment. You're not taking known trained employees, you're not taking already machinery that's already set up and used. You're not borrowing from within your company to make another gun. You're starting from scratch, and that's very difficult. And they had a real uphill battle. And ultimately they were able to develop the fully stainless steel Model 83, and that first appeared in 1983, and thus the Model 83 Freedom Arms. And this is a very early gun, and it was available with fixed and adjustable sights. I believe they still offer both. Has the one-line address on there, and of course the Casull patents down here. Very, very heavy-duty, well-made gun. Now, this gun is the only gun in the world, the only production gun in the world that is line bored. Every Freedom Arms Model 83 ever manufactured is line bored. Again, it has 17 4H pH stainless steel. It's heat treated. It brings the Rockwell incredibly high. Now, I got to sidestep just a minute. My first experience with that gun and cartridge began shortly thereafter when a friend of mine, it was a miner in Alaska, would come down during the wintertime and spend time in the lower 48s, and he bought one as a 6-inch with fixed sights. He bought one for bear protection, and he couldn't get ammo, so he came to me, and I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be fun. And it was. I did a lot of load development with that gun. I did a lot of testing and sent him back with some 345 grain heavy weight cast bullet loads for bears, and that was a real gun. I ultimately became good friends with Dick Casull, spent much time at his home and his machine shop, and of course at the Freedom Arms factory and so forth, and learned a lot more about this gun. But we, through experimenting, and I won't tell you how I did this, but I was able to get a 260 grain cast to go over 2,000 feet per second out of a 7.5 inch gun. Actually, it was 2,100, and incredible velocities and pressures. Now, I've also watched Freedom Arms intentionally try to blow these guns up, and the formulas and recipes that they tried were just they were absurdly over the top. The strength of these guns cannot be overstated. They are stronger than virtually any bolt action rifle out there. I mean, it's just incredible. 100,000 pound load is like a walk in the park. It's nothing to them. I'm not recommending that you shoot those type of loads, but it's showing the amount of strength. Now, back in the late 90s, of course, Freedom Arms, let me explain a little something before we go further here. They initially, Freedom Arms was doing all their own in-house ammunition. The early ammo, they took Winchester brass, 45 Colt brass that they had specially made, just longer. Still had the large primer pocket. And they soon learned that Dick had a bunch of steel inserts made to convert it to small rifle primers. And like Dick said, the analogy is a little odd, but when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. He said we want that powder to burn like a match, and that lowers the pressure. So meaning that when you ignite that case full of H110 or 296, same powder, but when you ignite it, instead of having an explosion that gives you a really quick peak pressure, you want it to burn progressively from the back, and that's why they went to the small rifle primer. That began in late 1985, early 1986. And Freedom Arms, now at this time, keep in mind that Freedom Arms was not a member of SAMI. They were proprietary. They set their own standards on ammunition, on guns, on chamber dimensions, all that. And so they were the only ones offering ammunition, and they could establish whatever pressures they felt needed. So what that did really, it made no one else want to chamber that gun because there was no industry maximum average pressure. So in the late 90s, Freedom Arms went ahead and introduced it to SAMI. They wanted to go commercial. They wanted to be an industry-wide cartridge, and of course, immediately Winchester and others began offering ammunition. But what's interesting is that Ruger had their Super Red Hawk, and that gun's known for its size and strength and mass. One of the engineers at the time was Tim Butler. He was actually the primary engineer that worked on the Ruger Red Hawk 454, and they did all their Carpenter series steel. They did all their testing, and they thought they had this gun ready to go. They'd been shooting it. They thought they were good to go, and they did some fairly significant engineering changing from a standard Red Hawk or a standard Super Red Hawk. So they go out, okay, it's time for proof. Now, proof ammo for the 454 is now SAMI maximum for production ammo 65,000, but proof ammo has to be between 87 and 93,000. So that gun has to handle that kind of pressure to pass proof and not damage the gun. So they run out, they put this new Super Red Hawk in the machine and fire it with some of the blue pill ammo, as the proof ammo is called, and boom, the gun failed. It was the first Ruger in history to fail. People don't understand the amount of pressures that something hovering around 90,000 psi is. It's mind-boggling. Okay, so, and the other problem is, and this is rarely talked about, but you're saying, well, okay, that's a similar pressure number to say a 300 Win Mag or 270. Yes, you're absolutely right. But there's a thing called the impulse time, and that means the pressure curve is just like that. It is sharp, it is quick, it is steep. This is a really strange analogy, but it's like setting a 20-ounce hammer on your toe. You're going to feel it, but it's not going to hurt. But you drop it from here on your toe, you're going to feel it. It's the same thing. The hammer doesn't weigh anymore, but the impulse time, that pressure curve is incredibly quick, and that's what is just makes the 454 kind of in a league in its own in regards to pressure. So again, the Freedom Arms handles that with no problem, but of course, Taurus, they were immediate. They were like, oh yeah, we can have that gun ready in no time. So they produced guns, and man, oh man, the failures began right off the bat. I was at a range with a fellow that I knew. He broke it out, and I'm like, he said, you want to shoot it? I said, no, I really don't. And and he starts blazing away. He had one box of 50 rounds, and he starts blazing away. He gets to the 10th round, the barrel literally blew out of that gun. It went downrange, and there was many other Taurus revolvers. The Raging Bull, as it was known, was full-length split barrels, and so the 454 is a very serious cartridge. It's not for just any gun. So now we've talked about the cartridge a fair amount. Of course, it's capable of driving in factory load persuasion, a 300 jacket at 1,600 feet per second. Freedom Arms that found a lot of popularity with their 260 grain, and it was doing about 1875 if I remember correctly, and it was a very popular for hunting and so on. But Freedom Arms used a special thick jacket. They used a lot of linotype in the core, and that was very important. You don't want to use soft jackets and soft lead core bullets in a 454 at full pressures. Pressures can spike and go through the roof. We've seen that actually happen. So it's something you really need to use bullet designed specifically for the 454. So now there's been many other calibers offered in the Freedom Arms Model 83. Of course, we've seen 357. We've even seen 22s, and those are shooters like this. And of course, 357, 41 mag, of course, 44 Magnum, 454, and also 475 Weinbach, 500 Wyoming Express. I think that one's going to come back, and I think it's going to be back with a 500 or 50 AE cylinder. Most of these guns have you can buy extra cylinders. Freedom Arms does not recommend shooting shorter cartridges in magnum length chambers. So for example, let's say you're shooting a 454, yes, you can put 45 Colts in and shoot it, but Freedom Arms will warn that it can cause some chamber erosion, because those chambers are just mirror shiny. They're beautifully machined and polished. And then when you hit it with a full power 454 load, even after you've cleaned it, it can cause sticky extraction. So they recommend getting an extra cylinder fitted if you're going to shoot the shorter cases, and that applies to pretty much any caliber that they offer. One other thing I wanted to mention, Freedom Arms holds their chambers to minimal dimensions. They have perfectly dimensioned throats to correspond with the barrels that give superb accuracy, and that's why many of these guns are they can be scoped up. Incidentally, the rear sight can be taken off, and it's pre-drilled for a scope mount base. So scope mount base sets down into the mortise of where the front sight would have set, and there you've got a base without any modification excuse me, or tapping or drilling. The front sight is set with a set screw, so the set screw can be pulled out, the front sight changed, different heights, different blade shapes, colors, sizes, whatever. So they're very much a very custom revolver. Now, one other thing I kind of wanted to mention was that let me get this thing back together. The grip shape, not sure the date that they did this, but I believe it was in the early 90s that they did this. They changed the grip frame a little bit. Now the original one, this is an original, to me it was perfectly shaped. Now if you're holding that gun correctly, or at least if I am, and I got my hand positioned correctly there, they never hit me on that trigger guard onto that second finger. And that's kind of a complaint with many guns that recoil with the level that these do. So they never bothered me a whit, but there was enough people that said we need more room there between the back of the trigger guard and the grip, that sometime during the early 90s, Freedom Arms changed that, and they basically reshaped the grip frame a little bit and gave just a trifle bit more room there between that second finger and that trigger guard. And the gun is beautifully shaped. It's a very handsome gun. Couple things I didn't touch on. If you've never handled one, you really owe it to yourself to go find one at a gun shop somewhere, look that gun over, run the action. You're gonna realize that gun I mean, like this gun, it's had thousands and thousands of rounds through it. This is actually the very first 475 line bob built. And I put this on the front cover of Guns and Ammo as a 6-inch octagon barrel, black micarta stocks. And this gun's been fired many thousands of rounds. And yet, if you look at it, it locks like a bank vault. There's just virtually no side play, no end shake, none. And Freedom Arms holds what's known as the barrel cylinder gap. They hold it right around 1 to 2 thousandths. I think 3 thousandths is their maximum for within their own factory specification. Beyond that, they call it out of spec, basically. Now, to compare that to other production revolvers, by SAMI standards, the Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute, you can have 12 thousandths and you're still within tolerance. And it's like, wow, the difference is huge. This gives more velocity. It also, something I kind of didn't touch on yet, I touched on the 11-degree forcing cone, which is kind of industry standard on production revolvers. But Freedom Arms uses a tight 3-degree. And the reason they do that is that their guns are, again, are line bored. They're not relying on kind of giving that bullet a lot of room to slop into the barrel. It's already dead center with the bore. They just want a little bit of room just to make sure that there's a smooth transition. And nobody else can do that. There's no other production revolver in the world that can do that. And it's one of the things that makes the Freedom Arms a factory-built custom revolver. Very high quality, very desirable gun. I've known many people have scoped these up and got 1-inch groups out of them. I actually, and this is a off subject, but back in the 90s, 7 or pre-97, I was working for Guns and Ammo in that group of magazines. And Freedom Arms was just coming out with the Model 97, and they sent me a prototype in 357. And I put that on the front cover of several Guns and Ammo magazines, did a full-length feature on it and so on, and shot it quite a bit. And then ultimately, Bob Baker, the president of Freedom Arms, wanted to get a production version in my hand, so we did. And I shot that gun a lot. I got Verl Smith of LBT to make me up a couple of different molds to my specifications. I scoped it up, and I was able to get that gun to shoot minute of angle at 100 yards. And I took a lot of fine-tuning of the loads, case preparation, the same thing that a bench rest shooter would do in prepping loads. But 1-inch groups at 100 yards. I'm not the only one that's done that. There's been many people have done that. The Model 83 is notorious for doing it in virtually all calibers. And I've known of people that have reported it. They're credible. They've done it with 357s, 41 mags, 44 mags, even 45 Colts. And so it's yeah, phenomenal gun. Now, back in the day when silhouette shooting was a thing, here's a 10-inch 44 Magnum, and that's a great shooter. They were a very dominant gun during that time, and unfortunately, with not long after the Freedom Arms really got off the ground with the Model 83, and it took them some time. They were a new gun company. People were like, Freedom who, you know, what company? And it was that way for several years after they had been in business. The first time I went to the factory, they had a vault full of guns and no sales. And today it's a waiting list. You got to wait to get one. It's not a lot. It's a reasonable waiting list, but they're very busy. So, and they don't rush things. They don't increase production to compensate for demand. They make every gun individually as it should be. So, here's one that's probably been my favorite of all of them. I bought this back in the mid-80s, and it's a special Model 83 that's had literally, I don't even want to tell you how many rounds fired through that gun. It became somewhat of a test gun. And this Scrimshaw here was done by a lady by the name of Walker that did the work for this is not a sticker, by the way. This is hand Scrimshaw work. And she subcontracted with the factory. I sent her the pictures that I wanted used, and of course an elk on one side, which was representative of the largest elk I ever took, a 7.7 by 8, and this one is of course a bear, grizzly bear, and there's quite a story behind that particular one. They faded over the years. They used to have, the bear had a very red tongue. The bushes he was standing up in were green. You know, it's been a long time, but this gun's been fired a lot. This one had the removable forcing cone bushing, and there was there was quite a bit of experimenting with this gun to get that right. Ultimately, the factory realized that the special heat-treated forcing cone bushing that threads in to the back of the barrel was very expensive to maintain. It was expensive to install, and they decided, you know, if somebody shoots the barrel out, it's easier to just put on a new barrel. So, but again, this gun, you know, even after some terrible powerful loads and much shooting, still works like a Swiss watch. And this gun was I've used this thing to take elk and bear, deer, many head of big game, and it's just been a wonderful gun. When Winchester brought out their factory load, I was invited on a special hunt down in Arizona to go down and shoot some stuff, and I took this down there. Everybody else showed up with big scope guns and, you know, all that stuff. Nothing against it, that's handgun hunting, but I show up with a gun I actually, you know, carry and used as a daily gun for a long time, actually, and never felt handicapped. It worked very well. Shot coyotes and hogs and everything else on that hunt. So but there you have it. I challenge anyone to find a higher quality, stronger, better built, more accurate revolver anywhere in the world. You can talk Korth or anything else. I'm sorry, those don't even hold a candle. And I've had a lot of experience with Korth, but they, and that's not to put other companies down, but this is in a league of its own. So we have a lot of custom gunsmiths that build Rugers, that take Ruger single actions and modify them and do many of the same features you see on a factory built custom revolver right here. So there you have it, and we'll probably do more on Freedom Arms and other related guns on that, but there you have it. Don't forget to like our channel, subscribe, feel free to make comments. We have so many comments that we don't always get a chance to respond. In fact, my phone's been down. I can't respond to anything for quite a while now, but anyway, we appreciate you watching, but don't forget to share to any friends that you might think enjoy the videos, and we'll see you next time on the Pierce Brothers.